And recording is in progress. And welcome back. We took a couple weeks thanks to a holiday of Pesach. I hope everyone enjoyed a beautiful festival of freedom. We are all liberated at this point, and now we are ready to embrace the Torah with our newfound state of liberty and freedom. So the Torah portion this week is the Torah portion of Achrei. It's sometimes referred to as Achrei, which means after, or it's referred to as Achrei Mot, after the death of. So let's study the Torah portion of Achrei Mot. And this class, the Wednesday class, is dedicated to what we call the Orchard of Torah. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, the Orchard of Torah, which is the acronym for the 4 different ways to explore Torah: the simple meaning of Torah, the hints that Torah has, the ideas we can derive from examining more deeply, and then there's the secrets of Torah. Those are the 4 different avenues of Torah understanding, all from the same book. So, let's see. All right. Now, let's jump to the text. I will share the screen of the text, and we will study based off of that. All right. Why can't I find it? Let's see. Here we are. Okay, so the text is now in front of us, and it's chapter 16, verse number 1 of the Torah portion, no, this week's Torah portion, book of Leviticus. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, and God spoke to Moshe, Achrei Mot shnei bnei Aharon, after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, V'karvasam lifnei Hashem, when they drew near to God and they died. That is the verse that the Torah begins with. And really, we're going to focus on this for a little bit, but let's just jump. Let's do a couple of verses and then go back to the commentary on the verses. So God speaks to Moshe after the death of Aaron's 2 sons. One of the more unusual deaths in the Torah is the death of Aaron's 2 sons. And God speaks to Moshe after this. Now, for those who are paying attention to the Torah readings of the previous weeks, we have 2 Torah portions between the episode of Aaron's sons dying and this verse. You know, you would look at this and you say, okay, it must be that the last week's Torah portion concluded with the death of Nadav and Avihu, and yet that's not the case. Nadav and Avihu, we tell of their passing in the Torah portion of Shmini. Since then, we've had the Torah portion of Tazria and the Torah portion of Mitzorah. And only now we're reaching the next Torah portion of Achrei Mot, and suddenly here we come across these words, God spoke to Moshe after the passing of the sons. So the question is, why are the 2 Torah portions in between if this conversation happened immediately afterwards? What does God say? Let's go to verse number 2, and then we'll go back to the Rashis. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and God says to Moshe, Daber el Aharon achicha, speak to your brother Aaron, ve'al yavo b'chol eis el hakodesh, and they should not enter the holy at all times. That area, which is the Holy of Holies, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, he should not enter there whenever he'd like, v'lo yamos, so that he should not die. Ki be'onon ero'eh al hakaporos, for I appear over the ark cover in a cloud. So here God says, don't make the mistake of thinking that as a Kohen, or even as a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, that you have unlimited access to the holiest place on earth. That is not the case. And if someone makes that mistake, it's going to be mortal error, it says. So that is what God says to Moshe. Rather, the only way you should come, verse number 3, the only way you should enter the Holy of Holies, bezos yavo Aaron al kodesh. With this, Aaron shall enter the holy, with a young bull for sin offering, a ram as a burnt offering. Verse number 4, he shall wear a holy linen shirt and linen pants shall be put upon his flesh, and he shall gird himself with a linen sash and wear a linen cap. But these are the holy garments, and then he shall immerse himself in water and don them. Those are the items with which he can enter the Holy of Holies. And even so, he has to wear special clothing, and he has to immerse himself in water before putting on the holy clothing. All right. These are the first 4 verses. Now, in the end of the Torah portion, if you were to just read this, even and going on further, if you were to just read this, the implication is that whenever Aaron wants to enter the Holy of Holies, he can do so on this condition: that if he has these items and he wears these clothing and he washes himself, immerses in a mikvah beforehand, then he can go to the Holy of Holies. It is only much later in the Torah portion where God says, and by the way, there's only one day a year that you can do this, and that's Yom Kippur. So that comes later. The Zohar talks about it. Why doesn't it say it over here? It would seem very logical that right over here it should state that you can't go to the Holy of Holies whenever you want, but only on one day of the year. That's not how it works. So it starts by saying the process by which he can go into the Holy of Holies. And then again, much later in the Torah, does it say that the only time you could do so is on Yom Kippur. So this is the opening of this week's Torah portion. Now let's go back to Rashi. So he has over here that God spoke to Moshe after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron. Why did they die? Why did they die? And if you look in the Torah portion of Shmini, which describes their passing, it is very vague as to what they did wrong. All it says, and to put the full context here, this happened on a day of tremendous celebration. It was the first day of the month of Nisan. It was the inauguration of the Tabernacle, which, let's spell that out a little bit. It is the inauguration for the very first time in human history, that there is a home dedicated to God. And that day it's being inaugurated. And on that day, we have the 2 sons of Aaron. And all it says is that they took pans of fire. And the Torah says, Eish Zara, a foreign fire. And they brought it towards the Holy of Holies, and a fire descended from the Holy of Holies, from God, and struck them, and that caused them to die. What did they do wrong? What does it mean, a foreign fire? What does it mean that they took a foreign? What makes a fire foreign? And what makes a fire appropriate when it comes to the temple? And these are holy. And to make the question, to add to the curiosity of this, Moshe Rabbeinu says immediately afterwards to Aaron, this, says Moshe to his brother, is what God must have meant when God said to me, Bikrovai ekodesh, that I will be sanctified by those who are close to me. So Moshe tells Aaron that somehow this was a form of sanctification of God by those who are close. So he was saying, your sons who just died were actually very holy. They were very close to God, and God sanctified himself in their passing. So this is all part of this strange episode, which again, the Torah leaves quite vague as to the passing of these two. So that's why the commentaries tell us that the beginning of this Torah portion sheds light on the events that took place when they died, which again is 3 Torah portions ago, even though it was only one day afterwards that this conversation between God and Moshe happened. And that's where Rashi comes in and says like this: Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe. God speaks to Moshe after the passing of the two sons of Aaron. Says Rashi, and the Lord spoke to Moshe after the death of Amat Talmud Lomar. Why does the Torah have to specify after the death of Aaron's two sons? It seems to be that those words are unnecessary. You see, these words after the death of this whole part of the verse seems to be unnecessary. It could simply be Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemar. God spoke to Moshe to say, tell Aaron, don't enter the Holy of Holies whenever you'd like. There's a whole process and there's a specific day. So these words that God spoke to him after the death of the sons of Aaron seemingly are superfluous. For that reason, Rashi explains what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. You may be familiar with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah from the Seder, right? We read about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in the Haggadah. So what does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah say over here? Why does the Torah tell us this conversation happened after the death of the sons of Aaron? He said, he says he compared it to a parable of a sick person whom a physician came to visit. And the physician told him, don't eat certain foods. Don't lie down in certain places. All right, that's what the physician told him. Don't do this. Then another physician came in and conveyed the same message, but in a much more profound, impactful way. The second physician said, don't eat these foods. Don't lay down in these places, because if you do, you will die the way so-and-so died. Obviously, the second physician or the second second method is going to be more effective because you're making it clear that there are those who tried before you and were harmed because of it. For that reason, God says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that God says the passing of the sons of Aaron to emphasize how important this prohibition is. And by the way, it's one of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. One of the prohibitions, the 613 commandments, or I should specify, one of the 365 prohibitions is that a Kohen is not allowed to enter the Holy of Holies at whim. So that is actually there's an actual commandment over here. And that, says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, is why the Torah tells us, Torah mentions the passing of the sons of Aaron. Verse number 2. So here we have, he says, you cannot enter the Holy of Holies at any time. Now, let's go back and examine this a little bit more deeply. What did the sons of Aaron do wrong? So as it turns out, there are numerous ideas which are told, because again, the Torah leaves it vague, numerous ideas which are said in regards to what they did wrong. On a simple level, this verse makes it clear. They went into the Holy of Holies when they weren't allowed to. They weren't given permission to go. They didn't have, the Holy of Holies requires special permission, a special day. That day is Yom Kippur. They went when they weren't allowed to. That's one idea given. Another idea given is that they went in and they were drunk. Why? What's the source for that? Because where would there be any allusion to the idea that they went in when they were drunk? So this takes us back to the Torah portion of Shmini, where the episode is recounted for the first time. And immediately after it describes Aaron's sons dying, the very next section of the Torah talks about the prohibition of entering the temple when one is drunk. So the commentaries say the juxtaposition of these two ideas, the passing of Nadav and Avihu, and the commandment not to enter the temple drunk, must be God's way of saying this is what they did wrong. And that's why immediately after their passing, God says, I'm warning you and all other Kohanim against entering the temple when drunk. So that's a second explanation. A third idea is that they went in without being married. And for a Kohen to enter the Holy of Holies, they has to be married. One of the more bizarre halachos describe is as follows. The Kohen Gadol was the high priest, and he would enter the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, and he had to be married. So the question is, that's what the Kohen Gadol was married. And it says, well, what would happen if the Kohen Gadol's wife died Yom Kippur in the morning? God forbid. But what if the Kohen Gadol's wife died Yom Kippur morning? So now the Jewish nation is stuck, that the high priest doesn't have the ability to go into the Holy of Holies. So for that reason, the Talmud tells us that before Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol was designated a backup wife in case something at the last minute happens. So he then has a wife as a backup in case his wife, God forbid, dies on the morning of Yom Kippur. That's how critical it is that for the one entering the Holy of Holies be married, is that just in case there was a backup wife. I'm not sure. You got to imagine his wife was not very excited about it, especially if the Kohen Gadol gave his opinion as to who the what is the there's a joke I'm just remembering now about a woman who's talking to her husband, and she says to him, when I die, and she's going on that if I die before you do, I'd like you to move on and marry someone else. And the husband says, okay. And then she says, and I think you should give her, if that happens, I think you should give her my golf clubs. And the husband says, no, that's not going to be necessary. So she says, why not? And he says, because she's left-handed. So the point is, maybe the Kohen Gadol's wife was not very excited about this. But this is that they went into the Holy of Holies without being married. Another explanation is they didn't have children. And for the Kohen Gadol to go in the Holy of Holies, he has to have children. Another interpretation is that they went in without wearing the right clothing. That to go into the Holy of Holies, you need proper clothing. And they went in without wearing proper clothing. So that's why they died. Now, I just want to recap 5 different reasons why the sons of Aaron died in that strange way on that festive day. Why they died. 1, they went in on the wrong time. 2, they went in when they were drunk. 3, they went in without being married. 4, they went in without having children. 5, they went in wearing the wrong clothing. Now, the Rebbe, in his commentary on this, shares an idea which kind of encompasses all of them. It's kind of seems to be 5 totally random reasons unrelated to one another. And the Rebbe explains, no, there is a underlying idea which explains and connects all of the dots over here. And all 5 could have been true. All 5, they're not mutually exclusive. Could be all 5 reasons were there. But what is an underlying problem which runs through all 5? Says the Rebbe, the answer to that question lies in what seems to be an extra word at the beginning of the parsha over here. The word is vayamusu, and they died. Do you notice that there's an obvious redundancy here? Vayedaber Hashem, and God spoke to Moshe after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron who came close to God and they died. One line earlier, you said after the death. Why do you have to say and they died? There's an obvious extra word here of vayamusu. And so the Rebbe explains like this, that at the core of the problem that the sons of Aaron, the mistake they made was that they sought to connect to God in such a way that they wanted to leave the world behind. And that was their goal, their idea over here, their thought, their understanding of spirituality, of relationship with God, was to leave the world behind. And that's what they wanted. They said the world is filled with nonsense. The world is filled with with corruption, dishonesty, and more than anything, Kabbalistically speaking, the world is a place in which God is hidden. And we don't want to have anything to do with that. We'd rather simply embrace divine truth and ignore the reality of this world that we live in. It is so frustrating to live in a morally bankrupt world. It is frustrating to live in a world in which godliness is hard to find. And here they said, suddenly we found a revealed presence of God in the temple. Let us run toward it. Let us leave the reality as we know it behind, and let's run toward it. And that was their mistake. And that's how the Rebbe explains the wording over here of Vayamusu is that God, the verse is telling us, B'karvasam lifnei Hashem Vayamusu, as they drew near to God and died, it is the attitude of how they drew near to God which caused them to die. It is the closeness that they sought which led to their passing, because they sought to leave the world behind, and in fact, in some ways, they accomplished what they pursued. They looked to leave the world behind, and God said, okay, no problem, I'll take you back. Even though in their minds, they perhaps thought that we could hold on to, in their minds, they felt, well, maybe we can remain here on earth while cleaving to God in a way that is ignoring of reality. And God says, no, if you're going to run towards me in such a way, then you can no longer remain as a human being on earth. And the problem was, the mistake was that that's not what God wants from us human beings. God does not want us to connect to God at the expense of engagement with reality on earth. What is expected of us is a fine line, and that is to engage with the reality of the world as we know it, while at the same time remaining connected to God. And it's understandable how someone who's in a great spiritual moment of uplifting reality can say, I want nothing to do with the world. I want nothing to do with people who are petty and materialistic, and with people who are self-serving and animalistic. I want nothing to do with them. God says that's a mistake. This, as the Rebbe is the core idea over here. And this runs at the core of all 5 reasons we said earlier that they died. The first is that they ran towards God without any calculation of when is the right time. And again, that fits with what we said, that somebody who says, look, all that matters to me is my closeness to God. I just want to run away from reality and run towards a spiritual experience, an otherworldly experience. So then there's no calculation of when is right, when is wrong. I just run. I run recklessly towards the light that I am seeking. The second point is that they were drunk. Drunkenness is often referred to as a state of leaving reality. I think we understand that. Drunkenness is a form of escaping reality. I mean, that's something which is abundantly obvious. So their drunkenness was a reflection of a spiritual drunkenness in which they said, I want to leave reality behind. And that's exactly what sometimes we do when we choose to drink, especially when we drink excessively, irresponsibly. What we're trying to do is escape reality. So therefore, that fits very well with the underlying problem that existed over here. So too does the next 2 reasons, in which they were not married, nor did they have children. Both the idea of marriage and children emphasizes a settling down into reality. As we all know, marriage, tending to children requires a person to be engaged with others, engaged with the world. You cannot be living alone in a mountain in one's own little aura if one has a family to tend to. So therefore, their avoidance of that. Now, some people struggle to find the right person to be married to, struggle to have children, but at least that's their goal. Their agenda is, I'd like to connect to others. I'd like to be involved in the reality of this world. And they avoided that, again, because of the same reason, because they were looking to escape. The key, maybe the most important word over here, is escape. Escaping reality. God doesn't want your connection to God to be an escape from reality. That is not the goal of it. And therefore, and then finally, the fourth one, the 5th idea, here's where it gets a little bit more mystical. And that is, we said the 5th reason that perhaps they died is because they were not wearing clothing. What does that have to do with escaping? Not that we're not wearing clothing, we're not wearing the right clothing. And the commentary, so the Rebbe says like this: if you look in the Tanya and you look in Kabbalah, clothing is a metaphor for mitzvahs. Mitzvahs, we clothe ourselves with the mitzvahs we do. Practically speaking, there are mitzvahs which have to do with clothing, right? We wear a head covering, or we wear the tzitzis, or we don't wear wool and linen. So there are mitzvahs connected to clothing. But on a deeper level, mitzvahs clothe us. They are what we wear. Interestingly, the Kabbalah says that the Torah that we study is like the bread that we eat, and the mitzvahs we observe is like the clothing we wear. Because the Torah we internalize, that which we study becomes part of who we are, becomes of our intellectual hard drive. It becomes part of our view of reality. So the Torah we eat is like the food we eat. Mitzvahs surround us. It is a little bit more external to us. It is what we wear when we put on. It says, interestingly, there's a pasuk which says that the tzedakah, vayilbash tzedakah kisirion, which means he wore the tzedakah like an armor, like a sheet of armor. The tzedakah becomes a sheet of armor which protects you and which you wear. When you come up to heaven, they're not going to be looking at your Gucci suit. The clothing they're going to notice is the mitzvahs you've done. That's your clothing. So therefore, it says on a deeper level, what it means, says the Rebbe, that the fifth reason that they enter the Holy of Holies without the proper clothing, which means without the proper mitzvahs. Because again, mitzvahs are an engagement with reality. When you think of mitzvahs that we do, it is almost always an engagement within reality. We put on the tefillin, which is physical items, which we tie to ourselves. We celebrate the Shabbos. We eat and drink in a mitzvah manner. So those are all engagement. The opposite of escaping is engaging. So this is the what they were lacking was the mitzvahs which force a Jew to engage with reality. And they were lacking that. So all of these reasons combined, all five reasons may have all been true. It stemmed from a single mistake. And the mistake was a belief that to connect to God, I have to run away from the reality that God created. And God looks and says, what are you talking about? This world which you see, all the people that you see, that you may be frustrated by, that you may be disheartened by, I created. I put that into your life for a reason. And you're running away from it to connect to me? No, thank you. And so this was their mistake. And this is the depth of what happened. And this is what God says to Moshe. Now I tell you that there is a time and place in which you can run to me. There is a time and place where perhaps there is a specific time in which we, to some degree, escape reality. And what day is that? What is the one day of the year that Judaism condones the idea of escaping reality? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, because it's only one day of the year, it is the day in which God says, today you don't eat, you don't drink, you don't engage in marital relations, you don't wear leather. That's basically, it's almost as if God is saying, if it's one day a year, then it's okay to have the Nadav and Avihu mindset, because it's one day of the year and all other days of the year. And in fact, immediately after Yom Kippur, what do? We throw ourselves into perhaps the most engaging holiday of the year, to build a sukkah, to create wood and to build and to put on the schach and the lulav and the esrog. We go from that day of, so to say, escapism, and we immediately engage, which teaches that even as we escaped, we didn't really escape. We said one day we'll separate ourselves from the mundane to have that close connection to you, but it's with the clear goal and mindset of reconnection into reality, which we see perhaps more than any other holiday on the holiday of Sukkot. All right, with that, we'll conclude this idea. Thank you all for joining, and I will stop the recording now. And if anybody has questions, I'm happy to take them.